Okay, so first of all, to get started with this panel, we're talking about a very important topic as far as the biggest challenges that are facing the planet and how we can solve some of these challenges. This isn't an easy topic and certainly something that we are not going to solve in 40 minutes or so, but we're going to give it a try. Many of you have experience in this space as far as understanding how to solve some of these challenges. Just for people who don't know too much about your background, let's start from over here and go this way. Tell me a little bit about what you do, where you're from, and why you're excited to be here.
Perfect. My name is Chelsey Smith. I'm from Global Citizen. We're an international advocacy organization that campaigns towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, tackling the world's largest challenges right there. Very excited to be here with the bright minds sitting up here with me tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, hi. Can you hear me okay? Yes. So my name is Martina Buchal. I am the World's Marriott Global Ambassador and also founder of Start Within. For the past 3 years or so, I have been on world tour working extensively with millennial changemakers all over the world. As Global Ambassador, my role has sort of been twofold. On the one hand, I host workshops and speeches empowering, enabling, and educating young people on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and other global issues, and how they can actually go about making a positive difference in their communities. On the flip side, I'm also actively listening to their stories, listening to what kind of challenges they're facing, and taking their voices to important international bodies, so the United Nations, the Summit of the Americas, and making sure that world leaders are actively listening to what the needs of young people are today. And why I'm excited to be here, I think this is an absolutely amazing opportunity to really create a movement of sustainable change for the future. And I think it's just an incredible opportunity. So I'm absolutely happy to be here and excited to see what I can learn as well.
Well, thank you. We're so excited to have you as well. And Andrew?
Right. Hi, all. I'm Andrew Stewart. The reason I'm here this evening is largely because I was connected to a couple of organizations in sub-Saharan Africa that are doing basically the aid work associated with getting small communities to be self-sufficient. My background is engineering. My business is real estate technology and investment management. And on the side, I've found a lot of gratification from getting involved in some of these micro projects that are seeing traction in getting people to a place in life where they're able to manage their own food security, water security, educational security, and a couple other sort of the key factors that make for sustainable life for those small villages. I'm excited to be here to see the nexus of innovation, technology, business acumen, and a social consciousness coming together to create change in the world.
Absolutely, and I just want to say I'm going to kind of jump all over the panel as far as I'm not going to go in order all the time, so just be alert, just to keep everybody on their toes. I want to make sure that we can make sure to have an interactive conversation, and we're also going to open it up to people in the audience as far as your questions. We really appreciate all of you being here tonight, spending time with us. It's late in the evening, but it's a gorgeous night, and I can't imagine a more perfect setting to be able to talk about changing the world than sitting right here today at this very moment, looking up at the moon and thinking about all of the teams who are working hard over the next 48 hours, who are working on projects to truly change the world. One of the questions that I wanted to ask, and Martina, I'll start with you, is this question. What do you think is one of the world's biggest problems right now that we do not have a solution for?
Whew, okay, she's not taking it easy on me. That's a really difficult question to answer. And you're asking for the biggest.
Yeah, the biggest. Let's start with the biggest.
Whew. Because I work with the Sustainable Development Goals, I think it's really difficult to identify sort of one big one. I think if I really want to pick on one subject, I think I would say that mindset generally is what actually the problem is in a bigger way. So while we talk about sustainable development goals, we talk about the need to take care of the environment, we talk about gender equality and how important it is to address those issues. I think actually one of the biggest problems that we face as humans, and that I'd like to see solved in my lifetime, is the way that we address our isms, our racisms, our sexisms, our ageisms. and the preconceived notions that we have in our heads about how things work. Because I think ultimately the way that we think about the planet and the way that we think about ourselves shapes the way that we interact with the planet and with other people. And that ultimately, in my opinion, is what actually leads to these big global problems, right? It's the way that we think and the way that we interact. So if I were to say that there's one sort of big one, it's what's going on in here and in here on a global level.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic answer. And just to pick up on that question, and Andrew, I'll come to you with this one. But one of the things that I've seen in the world recently that I think is concerning, to pick up on this idea of mindset, is also this distrust that people have as far as information and what they're reading, and this disbelief as far as where their money is going if they're donating to charities. We've seen the rise of documentaries on Netflix like Poverty Inc. It's an incredible documentary, but I think more and more people are looking to far corners of the internet to say, hey, you know, I don't trust where my money is going. I'm not sure that I'm really doing any good. I shouldn't donate to this cause because, you know, they're just getting a tax break or whatever it might be. And Andrew, I just want to know if you see that out there in the world, if you see that as a problem as far as people's perception and what we can do to potentially overcome that.
Another tough question. It's absolutely true. You see in everything from elections on this side of the Atlantic to the possible outcome of elections on the other side of the Atlantic, the level of disenchantment with certainly the political process. And you see serious politicians taking to Twitter to decide to make their views known on what's going on in their administrations, and deciding to use those channels, which are decidedly more informal in one sense, and not call it the old trusted CNNs of the world or whatever else. And so the level of disenchantment, both with the sources of information as well as those people who are intended to be running the platforms of our government, is high everywhere in the world, I think it's safe to say. Certainly in Europe, certainly in North America, and in parts of Southeast Asia. And that does translate, I'll say, from our experience as call it a micro aid organization or a micro entrepreneur organization in developing countries, that we get traction because people feel like they're talking to the guys who are actually administering the money and where it's going to go. And large organizations face a bigger challenge on that front because they are slightly more anonymous potentially, and people don't know personally who it is that's doing the administration or who's having the vision for moving money or intelligence or skills or training or whatever else it is into the places where it's needed. So I think the way to tackle that is to put a human face on all the organizations that are trying to do aid in various places and are trying to move the needle on important social and environmental and educational and justice issues. And probably my counterparts here have a better idea on how that's done given the number of organizations you're working with. But that seems to be a big theme, and it's definitely a problem today.
It absolutely is. And I think on the flip side of that, I think we also see the rise of movements like we have at the Breakout Project. We know that people are watching the live stream right now. They're excited. They want to build technology that has the potential to change the world. And in particular, we talked to some of the teams earlier who did their presentations, and they spoke about social movements. And obviously, many of them are using technology to potentially try to change the world. And I wanted to talk to you, Chelsey, for a second about the rise of these social movements on social media. In particular, I know a campaign that has been near and dear to your heart is the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. And if you could get specific and dive into that and talk about that campaign, how it came to be, and the effect that it had.
Yeah, when you look at transnational social movements, it's really interesting that you can have, obviously there's so many causes. You touched on the Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, poverty, so many issues that are close to us. And to have something so horrific happen across the world, and for it to make headlines in North America, to have the First Lady holding up #BringBackOurGirls signs on the red carpet, and to see that stay in the headlines for so long, is really, really interesting. And I think that social media is a big part of that. It's expanding the vernacular, it's expanding our conversation, expanding people's ability to get involved in social justice movements that are just not just in our backyard. You can stand up for change and for justice everywhere in the world, and that's really important. And I think social media is just one of those ways. It's really important that you still hit the streets. You can't leave everything to technology and think that a couple tweets here and there are going to move the dial, because they're not. A lot of that movement was successful because there was really strong leadership on the ground leading that change. And there still is a group leading that change in Nigeria, working towards solving the crimes and the atrocities that are being committed by Boko Haram. But it really brought the attention and the pressure to the world stage and world leaders. And that's important. We need to hold our world leaders accountable, and social media is a tool to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me a little bit like social media is sort of the gateway drug to social action in some ways. And we did see this era where it felt like all we saw was kind of slacktivism. I know that people use that term all the time as far as people sharing on social but not doing anything. But I do think there's been a bit of a shift. And it would be interesting, I think, Martina, if you could talk about this, because I think we've saw with recent marches, for example, people getting out, them gathering, them actually doing something. 2017 feels different to me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think for a while, social media did very much feel like, okay, we're all being informed and we're all sort of starting to understand these bigger issues, but what are we really doing about it besides sort of informing ourselves and sharing that information? And that, I think, is step one and is a fundamental step. I think in order to make real change, what we need to do is inform ourselves. Firstly, be curious about the issues. The second step is choosing what reality we really want for ourselves. And step three is taking action and actually doing something about it. And I think it maybe took a little bit of time to actually get from that information phase of really distributing that information. I think now we're much more in that action-oriented phase, and we can see social media as a tool for finding more people who are passionate about the same things that we're passionate about, whether it's the environment, whether it's gender equality, whether it's racial issues, what have you, whatever it is that you're passionate about, you can find somebody on the internet who is passionate about the same thing. You can come together and you can make an actual movement out of it in real life, IRL, right? And then take that to, your mayor, take it to your MPP, take it to whoever needs to hear this to actually cause change, to change policies. But that's not the only way to do it. I think really social media is now becoming that sort of that spark, the thing that actually sparks that interest, and then people go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're also seeing, in terms of that spark, what's happening there too is that maybe your local government is not going to change things. Maybe they're not going to do anything, but you have the potential in terms of getting together through social media and finding people who, like you said, you can get together with, and not even just doing that, but going one step further in terms of building something. And that's what this event is all about, as far as actually building something. And Andrew, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this, because I was recently watching a documentary, and they talked about this last 10 to 20 years of technology, and what we see there is basically, gadgets and gizmos and all these things come out. But the truth is, it hasn't really had that much of an impact on the world as far as changing things for good. But when we talk about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning being a component of that, I'm curious what you think as far as this next wave. Are you seeing the capabilities of this next wave of technology of being able to truly solve some of the problems that we face today in the world?
So the advent of what I'll call real AI, which is really just, I would say, in the last 5 years, started to have an impact on a day-to-day basis on everybody's life, certainly who has any kind of technology at hand, is a revolution that's both extremely scary on one hand, because we don't know how the tentacles are going to grow, but on the other hand, extremely powerful in a good way. What I'd say we've seen over the last 10 years, certainly in some of the work we've been doing in sub-Saharan Africa, is access to technology that didn't exist before. not so much, I'm diverging away from the question about AI, which is, I think, eventually going to hit the far reaches of the earth because it's a tool and a technology that is becoming cheaper and easier to transport in every kind of device, basically. But at the raw technology level, people have cell phones before they have clean water in places like Kitale, Kenya. But those cell phones, in and of themselves, are helping them create markets for goods that they're producing, and making it easier for them to create networks of collectives or cooperatives that actually succeed in growing crops and selling them at market prices within their markets. We're also seeing the advent of inexpensive solar power hitting those markets and providing the ability for kids, boys and girls, to be able to study at night. Sounds like a revolutionary thing, but the fact that they're able to have electricity at nighttime and to have lights means they can actually do their homework, which means they can actually survive in school and prosper in school and move on from that, which is a key building block for the formations of the societies. So the democratization of those technologies is making it possible for a lot of nations which wouldn't have had access to world markets or world communication methods 10 years ago impossible today.
Great answer. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's interesting. You know, we see Canada as being a hub for some of these new technologies, and we see the rate at which things are changing absolutely evolve. But there are still places, of course, in the world where even having a smartphone or a new technology like that is having an impact as well. Martina, I wanted to go to you, and this question I think is getting off track as far as technology. But I'm curious, what keeps you hopeful in this space? Because I would imagine, in terms of your role over the years, you could get discouraged. What keeps you hopeful when you wake up in the morning?
Honestly, I don't think I ever have been discouraged. Through the entire world tour, 30-plus countries, I've spoken to hundreds of young people, and they fill me with hope on a regular basis. I have a ton of hope for the future because what I see, regardless of which country I went to, what I've seen is young people who are hungry to know more, young people who are hungry to understand, to be educated, to ask questions that I think previous generations were scared to ask, maybe. And they're out there bravely asking those questions, you know. They can be anything like, you know, in a modern context, it could be something like, what happens when I actually throw out this piece of trash? Where does it actually go to? Does it end up in a landfill or does it get recycled? But it could be more probing questions as well. And anytime that I've spoken to young people, you know, they've always had a ton of questions for me and what I've seen in other contexts and what's working, you know, here, there, or there. And for me, that gives me a lot of hope because there seems to be this shift that I've seen in a willingness to understand the other and the way other people do things. There seems to be more willingness to collaborate. And that gives me a ton of hope because I think that a lot of the world's problems come from a place of competition, a feeling of scarcity and competing for resources and having, you know, stark boundaries around things and thinking that that actually means something. And I think that young people today, in many contexts, are seeing things very differently. That gives me a lot of hope for the future because if that's the mentality that young people are bringing into the future and this is how, you know, they interact with the world around them, I have hope that they'll raise their children that way. And then those children will have, you know, an even better mindset about how to interact with the world. So for me, hope is something that I'm constantly filled with because I see there's passion, there's commitment, there's curiosity around making the world a better place.
I think you're bang on. I mean, especially with a younger generation. I talked to my presentation about Generation Z or Generation Z here in Canada, and their willingness to want to change the world. And about 60% of them wanted to change the world. They believed that they would have a job that would have an impact to do just that. And that's compared to just 30% or so of millennials. So we know, I think, especially with this younger generation, they believe that it is their responsibility and job to do this. So it's very exciting. I did want to talk for a second, Chelsey, because I know you've done a lot of work with women, and I'm curious what you think about the role that gender will play in solving the world's problems. Sorry, I have big questions. It's late, right? I should relax a little bit. You guys are like, chill out, have a beer.
These are tough questions.
These
They're
are
really good.
super tough
I'm
questions,
sorry,
but I
I'm sorry.
appreciate it because you need to get like down to the good stuff. I think Yeah, gender is absolutely going to be on the forefront. You can't move forward and leave half the population behind. That just doesn't happen. And I think that people are struggling these days with these different ideologies of feminism and what is it and what does it mean, going back to your isms in the beginning, that mindset needs to change. There needs to be a very huge paradigm shift there. We need to get it together, move forward. Prime Minister Trudeau said it best, like it's now 2017, but it's time. And gender is going to be, it's on our political agenda, it's on our social agenda, it needs to be on every single agenda moving forward. It's a piece of the problem and it's part of the answer.
So I want to ask you just a follow-up to that question, but in terms of some of the communities that you've seen, have you seen what many of us have heard about women in the community, how women, if they become successful, they then help to help the whole community rise up? Is that an experience that you've had?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, I'm a big fan of sisterhood myself, but I think that when you truly educate a girl, you educate a village. Research shows that, businesses show that, research shows that. It's exactly how the world works and how things need to work moving forward. So yeah, when you invest in a girl, you change the world, for sure.
Martina, I can tell just from watching you might want to follow up on that question a little bit.
Absolutely. I have so many opinions on this subject. One of the big things I noticed while on tour was, regardless of what context I was in, boys and girls always behave slightly differently. And it was kind of sad to see. But in a context, I'll give you an example. I was working with the United Nations Development Program on a youth leadership program in the Maldives. And we had 20 boys and 20 girls between the ages of 16 and 18 on this program. And they were all there because they were exceptional leaders in their communities in some way, shape, or form. They applied to be part of this program to really develop their leadership skills. And, fantastic in their own right. But it was really interesting when the boys and the girls came together in that environment, that when leadership roles in that environment and a group of leaders came up, the boys and the girls behaved differently. The boys were much more likely to step forward, to speak up, to be more ambitious, and the girls kind of naturally sort of took a step back. Didn't speak up, were a little more quiet, a little more reserved, much more polite, which is not to say the boys were impolite, but it was more along the lines of the girls were more likely to say things like, actually, if I could add a point, or if I could say something, or I was just thinking, A, B, and C. And seeing this, not just in the Maldives, but in Kenya, in India, in Nepal, in Colombia, in classrooms in Canada, to be honest. For me, makes it so clear that we still have so much work to do to make boys and girls feel like they're equal players. There is sort of, societal norms shape the way that we feel and the way that we behave. And yes, there are political aspects to it, of course. Policy is an important part of it. Getting women into leadership positions is a part of it. But I think as well as society and as people, generally, we need to be empowering others and listening for others and listening for what voices aren't being heard in the room, whether they're male or female, but to equalize that playing field, because we don't all step up to the plate in the same way.
Absolutely. So we've touched on gender, we've touched on social media, we've touched on technology. One of the things I would like to talk about next, and Andrew, I'm going to start with you, is capital and access to capital. Because if I learned anything from watching Poverty Inc., and I only mention that because I think it's an accessible documentary for people to check out, what I learned is in order for some of these communities to thrive in developing nations, they need access to capital, they need to be able to run their own business, they need to be successful on their own. And I would love you just to expand on that from your firsthand experience.
So the first thing I'd say about capital is that it should never be the thing that you lead with when you're trying to make some sort of intervention or some sort of contact in a new context. In our experience, when you lead with capital, capital becomes the only story, and it becomes the only venue through which you can influence, becomes the only venue through which you can provide any help to those developing communities. So terribly important, at least in our experience, is that you spend time, first of all, making contacts with people, understanding the people in the community, understanding the assets of the community. Too much, as Westerners, we usually go in and say, what's the problem? How do we fix this problem? Rather than, let's go into this community and let's find out what the assets of this community are. What strengths do they have? What relational strengths relationship strengths do they have? What natural resources do they have, et cetera? And then you can intelligently, apply, call it relationship input to what's going on in the environment, and then add capital to that in a sensible way. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I think that it's very important to start with the relationship and start with understanding context before providing capital. And then I would say the second macro lesson from that, at least in my experience, has been the case is you have to create a context in which there's skin in the game for the people who are receiving capital. So either it's in the form of repayment of loans or in the form of anteing up some of the funds that are required to get the project done, or some other mechanism that sort of involves them in the sort of called the partnership of capital being applied to a context.
Can I just get you to expand on that for a second? Because I'm just curious as far as why that is. I think I understand why that is, but I would love to just hear in your words, why is that? Why don't people just want handouts? Why wouldn't you just want money? And I kind of know the answer, but I would love to just hear you explain what's the human condition that makes us want to really earn our livelihood and go out there and do it on our own.
It's kind of an existential question, I guess. But
well, welcome to my panel.
Everybody wants to have a feeling of self-worth, and I think just being given stuff all the time doesn't contribute to self-worth. Feeling like you've earned something, you worked for something, you've made something happen with whatever your resources are that you're bringing to the table is key to project success. And I think it's true for us. I remember in the early days of, this is a completely different context now, of us selling software, we would get a hold of a potentially huge client like UPS or something like that. And we'd say, you know what, we're just going to give them the software so they start working with it. And what we found when we gave software away, stay with me here, it's a bit of a stretch, but when we gave software away, those projects failed. When customers paid something for the software, those projects succeeded. It's a bit of a generalization, but it's really important for people to feel like their own skin is in the game before they're going to make a project go. If you feel like you just got something for free, it doesn't have the same value as if you paid for it.
Absolutely. I think you definitely answered that question. I just want to say hello to the people again who are watching the live stream right now. Thank you so much for staying up with us tonight. I'm sure there are other things you could be doing, but I'm happy that we have you here watching. I wanted to just, as we wrap up in the next few minutes, I wanted to turn to you, Chelsey, and get you to tell me a story about someone who's inspired you, who has changed the world. Because I know we've been talking in general a lot here about women and communities and people, and you all now have a second to think of your own, right? Is there an example of one story? Is it a child? Is it a mother, a father? Who's that one person where you've had a conversation, you've seen what they've done, and that has had a lasting impact on you?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah. I've been very fortunate to meet amazing people, have met a lot of great people who've walked in and out of my life, a lot of great experiences. I think I'm going to choose to tell a story about my host father, who I was living with in Ghana in West Africa. And this was my first time. I was 20 years old. It was my first time traveling alone as a woman. It was my first time traveling overseas. It was my first time in a completely different context, grappling with a lot of culture shock and different ideas and struggling a little bit, but making my way. And there's a story that my host father told me that has kind of stuck with me and really helped with perspective. And I think perspective, going back again to how we started this conversation and looking at the isms and the mindset and innovation in general, how you tackle issues kind of comes back to the fundamentals of problems and what you see as a problem and how you choose to attack it, really. And so we were sitting up one night listening to the radio out on the porch, just kind of chatting. And I was talking a little bit about my life back in Canada and getting to know the family that I was staying with and the work that I was doing, that sort of thing. And as we're talking, he asked me a question. And he said, Chelsey, if you had to choose between saving one life and it was either your partner or your child, who would you save? Yeah,
wow.
I know. You were asking the big questions and giving big answers. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like, I don't know. I can't, first of all, it's really difficult for me to put myself in a position where I have to imagine making such a choice. I have such immense privilege that's really difficult. But I kind of thought about it a little bit more, and I said, I think that I would, in the culture and the beliefs that I have and where I came from, I think I would save the child. And he said, that's not how things are done here. That's he didn't say foolish, but he kind of looked at me like, you have a lot to learn still. Here, where we live, infant mortality is at a high. And as a woman, you wouldn't be able to work and care for your child at the same time. You need to have a partner or your community to partner with you in that. And that alone kind of just blew me over backwards and was a really great lesson for me in both privilege and in perspective, and just being able to take yourself out of your own position, your own background, and really reassess your privilege and a situation. And it was a big learning experience for me, and I would like to thank my host father in Ghana for that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, it's an incredible story. And I also think, that's always a concern, I think, for a lot of people in today's world, where we have these kind of filter bubbles as far as how we get stuck into our own little communities, and we don't hear the stories about how other people live. So you've had a minute to think about this. Do you need a glass of water, by the way? I would love a glass. Okay, because I have been coughing for like 3 days, so I have a lot of empathy for your cough. Can we grab a bottle of water? It's not me coughing, surprisingly enough. I thought it would be me, but we'll grab you a glass of water, Martina. Andrew, maybe we can start with you and let Martina just get a drink here. And Andrew, if you would just tell us the story of the one person who's had. Oh wow, this is service. Thank you so much. I'll steal a bottle of water. Why not? Okay, thank you. All right. We're having a pretty in-depth conversation up here, so we all need to have a little drink of water. Maybe something even stronger later on. Who knows? Okay, Andrew.
So I had the privilege of briefly meeting a guy I think is really a hero. We're talking about innovation here tonight, and this is a man that innovated in a way that changed a lot of lives. His name is Mohammed Yunus. He's the founder of the Grameen Bank, which was a microfinance bank started in Bangladesh, of which he's a citizen. And the meeting I had with him was short and sweet. There was the interchange itself wasn't of significance, but what he's done has been really significant. As I said, we're talking about innovation tonight. He is not the inventor of microfinance by any stretch. There were lots of guys doing it before he came on the scene. A lot of them were doing it badly. A lot of them were doing it in loan sharking kinds of ways. He had the insight and the innovation to say, what you need to do is you need to do finance in a way that brings a whole community or a cooperative of almost entirely women together who would hold each other accountable, who would take the loans, who would cross-guarantee each other's loans, and therefore, in a community sense, basically take on debt that could then finance the start of all kinds of small businesses. And the extent of the financing that got done was tiny. Sometimes it would be $2, sometimes it would be 50 cents, sometimes it would be $3. But these amounts were enough to get things kick-started, to get what Jeffrey Sachs, the author says is to get to the first rung on the ladder. He got that started, and he I would say single-handedly lifted millions of people out of poverty as a result. And Bangladesh is a different country today. It's still a country that has many needs, has a lot of deficits in terms of social and capital and welfare elements, but it's a country that's on its way now.
That is an excellent story to share, I think, especially at the Breakout Project, as we know there are teams here who are working on projects, and just to see the potential of one person's idea and how it was built along the way. So thank you so much for sharing that. Martina, you're still coughing a little bit, but I would say, because I have these cough attacks all the time, that if you need to cough, just take a break and I'll fill in, don't worry. So
I think I'm okay. I think actually if I start talking, I might stop coughing.
Okay, let's do it. Let's try it.
All right, so actually you asking that question brought me down memory lane in a really big way. So you asked about inspiration. And there's so many people that I've met, been very lucky to meet, that inspire me. And for the record, I'm not crying, although I look like I'm crying. I may have swallowed a fly. Full disclosure.
That's actually probably
Full disclosure, everyone. But I think one of the biggest people, or one of the people who really stands out to me, is Sudha Subedi, who is from Nepal. And she's somebody who I consider to be almost a sister to me now. I met her in Kathmandu. I met her before Kathmandu, actually, through a global leadership competition that we both participated in. And back then, I only knew her really for a week in the context of the competition. Later, I got to know her through email, through social media a lot more. Sudha is somebody who comes from a rural community in Nepal. And she's a young woman in a family of 5. Her responsibility in her family is to take care of her whole family. At the same time, somehow, she has managed to start a startup and an NGO, at the same time empowering women in her community. She started book clubs, book exchanges, clothing, donation services for her community. And what Sudha and her story and everything that she puts into life for me represents is that we all have choices. Sometimes they're really difficult, but we all have choices to make around what we see in reality and what we choose to do about it. Sudha was raised in a culture and a household where she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. A lot of expectation on her in the context of her family, in the context of her business, in the context of society as a woman. There are certain things that Sudha is not supposed to do. One of those things is she probably shouldn't be a leader because nobody would want to marry her. These are the kinds of comments that she hears on a regular basis. And yet, she chooses to look at that reality that faces her and sees these comments that are coming in her direction, and she says, okay, I see you, but I'm going to do something different. Sudha is one example of hundreds of people who are doing this around the world. Going back to your question earlier, what gives me hope? This. What inspires me? This. People like Sudha, who are all over, who see reality and decide, you know what, I'm going to innovate, I'm going to do things differently. And yes, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to push.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to wrap up because we've had some pretty intense conversations over our panel. I do want to wrap up with just one more question for each of you. And I think this is more a practical question, just for people who are watching the live stream and people in the room today. Because I mentioned the filter bubble that we get in, and we forget of the potential that we have to change the world, and we forget about the people who potentially need help. And I would argue that one of the reasons is because we get into these habits of living in our own little world and reading our own little social media sites and not getting exposed to some of those people, like you mentioned, and those places and the technology that's being built. Could you just, on a practical sense, and Andrew, we'll start with you and go down the line, could you just name a place where you go online to read about whether it's social good in the world or any type of website, just to understand what's happening in this space? And just to be able to get good information about changing things and inspiring and practical stories about who's doing this?
I don't have a good answer for that. I'll answer with a more, call it a general framework, which is this. I think that we underestimate how much our clicks or our decisions to view or follow up on a story matter to whatever the purveyor of the stream of media is, whether it's mainstream, old school media, or whether it's a new social media platform. And so every decision we make to read something or not read something, to dive into an issue or a question or an article that comes up, moves a needle. Media is as a consumer, I can see is extremely adept at making decisions about how they're going to purvey information, and they will respond to demand. And so I would say at a much more general level, I try to stay away from clicking on stories or absorbing any stories that don't move the needle. I try to ask myself the question, is this going to matter to my life 5 minutes after I've read this or not? And there's a kind of a very general answer to the question, but what it means is that over time it leads me in the direction, whatever the platform is, whatever the news agency is, in the direction of stories that matter. And those stories that matter over time take me to questions about what's going on in South Sudan right now, or what's happening in northern Kenya on a couple different fronts. And I wind up being better informed about world issues at a global scale, because all the media platforms are capable of delivering it. You just have to make decisions and let them sort of purvey to you that kind of content, because you make the decision to read that kind of content.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's great advice. I mean, you're right in terms of just deciding and being in control of what you read, and in many ways that can lead to more happiness overall. I think if you're consuming content that is helping you to understand and potentially getting you out there to help people as well. Chelsey, I wanted to throw it over to you. Is there a go-to destination or a place that people should go to read, or a documentary you just saw? Just a little tip that we can close off the panel with.
Yeah, I'm actually going to have to plug Global Citizen for this. Sorry, but I got to do it. Globalcitizen.org. It is a platform where you can learn and read about issues that you care about, everything from ending extreme poverty, curbing climate change, or increasing equality around the world. You can actually then take action on the site as well. So if you're reading about something that you're passionate about and you want to use this awareness and take action and make a call out to world leaders or corporations, join in a Twitter campaign or sign a petition, call the president or the prime minister. You can do that with a few clicks. So I would definitely recommend going online, reading through our amazing content. We've got a lot of fun videos. We really do a good job of breaking down dense policy issues and making it digestible and easy to read, to share, and to get involved, which I think, going back to previous in the conversation, is it's great to be aware, but you got to do something. You need to take action. We make it easy. Join the movement.
I do follow you guys, and props to you, because you have great content, timely content, and like you said, it's very digestible for people as well. So great tip. Martina, just to wrap up, what's your go-to place as far as where people should go or what they should read? Maybe there's a documentary they should watch or a book, whatever it might be.
Sure. So my suggestion would actually be, don't go to the happy stuff all the time. I think there are great sites out there. Global Citizen's fantastic. Upworthy has really great uplifting content, and I think it's great to be looking at what's good in the world, but I think it's equally important to look at the bad stuff and to be really brave and to actually look at the stuff that we really don't want to be looking at, and the stuff that we disagree with, most importantly, actually. I will openly say I'm not a Trump supporter. I follow Trump. Why? Because I need to know what's his thinking, what is he doing, where are these policies coming from. In fact, I make an extra effort to follow people on Twitter, on Facebook that I don't agree with, because I want to understand that perspective. And in a lot of ways, it gives me, I think, a more balanced view of what's actually happening in the world and how different people perceive things. So yes, Upworthy and all of these fantastic, positive resources are important, because we can get really bogged down with the negative stuff in the world. I mean, if I'm constantly looking at the news all the time, that's depressing. There are so many things that I can look at that are wrong with the world, and I can fall into a depression just thinking about it. So yes, the balance is important, but absolutely look at stuff that you don't want to look at, because that's where the real learning happens. That's where the real shifts happen. And that's where, you know, people like the people who are in this room, who are problem solvers, can find the problem to be solved. That's critical.
I guess you shouldn't look through my browsing history because I spent a lot of time on Bored Panda. I'm just kidding. That's an inside joke for anyone who knows that site. Just a quick plug to wrap things up. You talked about reading things that maybe make you feel uncomfortable. A friend of mine has written a book recently called The Beauty of Discomfort, and it kind of touches on that idea. Not specific to exactly what we're talking about, but I think it's okay for all of us to get a bit out of our comfort zone. And I think that's a great way to end our panel tonight. We've had an excellent session. I could talk to you guys forever. However, there's a lot more planned for the rest of the evening. Thank you so much, and a big round of applause from everybody here for our panelists. Thank you. Hi, I'm Amber Mac, and if you like this video, click to subscribe to the Breakout Project channel to watch more videos just like this one.